So strangely, this was completely by accident. I started playing Tell Me Why, which was Don't Nod's game from 2020. And the reason why I say this is a coincidence is because yesterday was Trans Day of Visibility. Um, I didn't remember that as I was playing the game, and the game Tell Me Why features a transgender character very prominently. And in it, I started getting really interested in the way in which it approached representation. So, one of the things that I kind of want to talk about in this episode is how you do representation of marginalized groups, especially if you yourself are not a member of that group. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Furidashi podcast. I am, as always, Nicholas, and I am here with the delightful Lauryn, whose bangs have been freshly cut, if I recall correctly.
Or yes, were they cut freshly cut bangs.
Yes, the smell of freshly cut bangs in the morning.
Sweet smell of fringe.
But before we get into the topic for today's episode, we record about a week in advance. So right now, let's just say certain things are happening at Activision Blizzard that are the, I guess you could say, continuation of other things that have been happening at Activision Blizzard. And we've talked about this before. And I would just like to reiterate that our stance on all of this is that we are 100% always in solidarity with the victims of oppression and the victims of harassment and abuse. And when it comes to you all out there, if you're feeling angry about what is going on and you want to do something, that you should always take the lead of those who are the victims of abuse, what they want to be done, how they feel they can be made whole. Don't go off and do weird vigilante crap, because it's easy to get caught up in the sort of the salaciousness of everything that's going on, but your focus really should be on the people who are affected by all of the horrible things that have been going on at Activision Blizzard. And you should also remember that they are the ones actually making the games. Bobby Kotick is not the one who makes the cool armor sets. He's not the one who makes the really awesome skins for COD. Like, it's the people who are being harassed who do those things. And so you should be always on their side and no one else's. So with that, Lauryn, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, and with that in mind, it is very important for us to realize that it is better to be duped by a victim than to say that the company was in the right all along from the very beginning.
Yes.
There are a lot of compelling arguments on the other sides of bubbles that you may or may not be aware of, where, of course, the CEO couldn't have known, or, of course, these things did not come to light. And with the recent story that just came out last week, it is very important to see that they were incredibly aware, if not outright abusers themselves. And so remember that. And also remember that the levity and the joke of the situation, which is bringing us into this episode, is that if Blizzard announces 6 new gay heroes, this is not a justification or an acknowledgement of past transgressions. That is absolutely a cover-up.
Exactly.
Right? So, and that is how you need to, and this kind of brings us straight into, the AAA kind of aspect of this versus the indie aspect for what we want to talk about in today's episode.
Yeah, so today, I set this up. Hopefully, I will have set this up in the cold open. I'm not sure what I'm going to end up using, but we want to talk about representation in video games, specifically in mass market, so-called AAA video games, and the problems that AAA companies have with dealing with the representation of marginalized individuals appropriately, because there is a lot of representation of people from marginalized groups, but often is extremely inappropriate, or it has this tendency to take on essentially like say a racialized character is just a skin for a white person.
Yep.
And to me, the example that always comes up is Uncharted, where you have a female black character whose voice actor is a white woman, and whose blackness in that game is kind of insignificant, like or like it doesn't matter. Like
Like,
she could
quite
she could be
literally feels like she was a poster child for the game.
exactly. Whereas, and Lauren has addressed this before, you have games like Spider Man Miles Morales where a lot of effort and detail has been put into that game to make sure that it is not just culturally sensitive, but also because just so that the game itself reflects a sort of like cultural milieu in a meaningful way, not just that like it's there and it sort of like ticks a checkbox. So, Lauren, if you want to, since it is one of your favorite games, why don't you speak a little bit about that, and then we'll get into sort of the larger issues that we want to address.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that when we look at the marginalized, like the representation of marginalized demographics, right? Not just the peoples, right, but
Yeah,
also maybe demographics of a set of people. This is really important to me because I'm at that weird intersection between both being a part of the LGBTQA community. I also was born a woman and identify as a woman. So that is in the games industry, maybe not
yeah,
in the world, right? In the games industry, that is something that is very foreign to people, which is very strange because let me tell you, I'm one of the first people to say that I was not part of the movement that was like, we need female groups for everything and female leadership and female training and blah, blah, blah. But then they're run by women who are like, how to be more woman. And really, I just don't want to be woman. I just want to be Lauren. Is that too much to ask? And so, but that's really important, right? Because I was born this way, right?
yeah,
And I happened to identify this way.
yes,
Awesome. And so that means that it's technically I'm cisgender, right? Like I was born female. I am female presenting.
yeah,
That doesn't mean I can't wear a suit or whatever. It just means, right, this is great. So I fit into this norm of what it
yes,
means to be female.
yeah.
Now, when we look at race and we look at Miles Morales, I absolutely love that game, or we should call it ethnicity, really, because it's his heritage, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit more
Um,
complicated when you're talking
it,
about Latino individuals.
yeah, it's going to be a little more complicated. So, ethnicity
Yes.
and heritage, especially in New York, is that this game had a lot of amazing reviews and a lot of amazing like press, and I was like, okay, great, whatever. But then as people's stories came up and they showed me the screenshots and they showed me like the mixed heritage that he has and the struggle that he's dealing with, the entire game is really about him becoming Spider-Man
Yeah,
and not about him being like, right, a kid from Brooklyn that's now in Harlem, that Harlem is predominantly, right, black and Hispanic, and he happens to be of both those races. And
yep,
oh no, the struggle of race and corporate America, blah, 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 blah. It the reason why I'm so happy for that is that it's not a game about where he came from. It's a game about who he is, right? And
yeah,
who he is are these ethnicities and this heritage and this culture, and who he realizes is that he does have a home in Harlem, because that's kind of the story. Is that, and this is not actually spoiling any of the like, there's no spoilers in what I'm saying, right? But culturally, he has a home in Harlem. And what I think was amazing about the developers at Insomniac, shout out to Grant Parker, who I saw your name in like the giant scroll. Uh, and I think that every developer, and even at the highest level of development, which means the people that give the money, right? The
yeah,
executives, went out of their way to find and get critiques on the cultural aspects of this character.
yes,
And so one of the famous scenes in the game, this is public knowledge in the uh, on the internet, is that they're cooking Thanksgiving. They're cooking Christmas Eve dinner. What are the meals that would be there? What are the music that they would play?
yeah,
Right. Who are some of the artists on these vinyl records, right? That they would actually have access to, or that they would, like, a lot of families, right? Mexican families, or Hispanic families, I should say. And like how that would be, and like the dishes they would make, and how do the dishes actually look, how are they prepared, how are their interactions. And they actually changed a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the um, like the food trucks stands, especially in that game, to match the
yeah,
culture, not just New York, right,
Yeah.
but of Harlem. And there's a very cool Easter egg that I found with my boyfriend that I am going to share with you actually. And I'm making my segment go a little long, so I'm sorry, Nicholas.
No, it's our
But
podcast. We can talk about whatever we want.
I have to tell you guys this Easter egg. So they changed so much of this game, and you can see the nature of AAA development that a lot of this honestly came a little bit later in development that I think they would have liked. Because I'm not sure if they didn't start with the culture advisor. They made their game, okay? And
Yeah.
then they brought in the culture advisory team to the writing staff. Because of course, like narrative is just,
It's just the
it's just
rapper.
something it's
It's
just
the
the
narrative.
wrapper. You can do it
I fucking
late.
hate that phrase, narrative rapper. I hate it
I
so
also
much.
hate it because reason why you play Miles Morales is the narrative and the context. You could swing through Spider-Man all live long day, right? But that
Yeah.
doesn't make, that's not what stood out about Spider-Man 2 on the GameCube. Okay. Rolling back. Easter
Yeah.
egg for all of you out there. There's a very important radio call that Miles' mother gives him and says, "Hey, can't wait for you to come to my rally. Look for the Yeto truck." Okay, it's gonna have the big Yeto. It's her favorite because that's a very big part of New York culture is food trucks.
Yep.
But if you weren't aware, right, Yetos and the Arabian population and the Greek population, like Turkey, it's a huge thing, right, in New York City.
Yeah.
If you weren't aware, now I can tell you right now that there is no Yeto truck in the entire rally in an art asset. It does not exist because I searched for it and I got fed up and I quit. Now my boyfriend is playing through this game and I'm watching him because I kind of sped run it. I think I completed the whole campaign in like, I don't know, 20 hours or 30, something really, really crazy.
Yeah.
Like Insomniac's gonna hear that and be so upset. But so I sped through it. I didn't really do I did some optional content, but not a lot. He goes through it and he's talking to every single food truck stand. And we get to the Yeto truck where they're like, "Oh yeah, I love this place. Has the best Yetos in town." And we look at it and it is an LA hog barbecue truck where it only serves corn and mashed potatoes and grilled meat. And I just look at him and I'm like, wow, that is
Uh,
like, they're like, it's my comfort soul food. Like, that's the lines or what they're talking about. And I
yeah.
went,
Yeah.
I wonder which demographic in America thinks hometown barbecue is a comfort food, right? You're not going to find a barbecue food truck
Where,
in New York
yeah.
City.
Where is it? Where is Insomniac? Now I have to look this up because this is
Insomniac
curious.
is in Insomniac is in LA. They're in Santa Monica.
Oh, okay. That's probably why.
Ah, see? What demographic of America is like, you know what I want? I want me some barbecue. Now, hold on. I say that like that because I lived in Alabama, and I am just to be clear,
No
I
one's
actually
allowed.
just had barbecue last night. Um, and I say that because the type of barbecue that was presented to us in this barbecue truck, just so that we're clear, okay, was a barbecue that is a very specific demographic of which you all know I am talking about. It is much more like the upper upper echelon of barbecue to these people. I have no idea.
The
That's not
high
what it is.
tier, the highest tier of
Not
barbecues.
even high. I don't want to call it that because like some of the best barbecue you can get is like in like
In KC,
Louisiana.
like yeah,
Yeah, or
no,
in Kansas City,
yeah,
or no, I'm just saying like is in these is different.
yeah, yeah,
Anyway, all that to say that shows you right there the cultural dissonance, right? Of these developers were like, obviously you go to barbecue food trucks, right? Because we're of a certain demographic. And the writing team admits, like, right, they were not of Miles' like specific demographic. And
yeah,
then when they finally went to the culture advisor, they did change the writing, but it came too late in the AAA development cycle process to change the food truck or the people working the food truck
yeah,
to actually to change the art, right? So I missed that entirely because the art did not say right Eidos. And I think that that's a step in the right direction, but you can see since it came so late, right? I get to now tell you guys about this Easter egg. And I have to say that of all the stuff that Insomniac did, it's better for the whole of the experience, right?
yeah,
And I'm sorry, artists, that they literally, I can tell that you were just not given enough production time to
yeah.
change the asset. You know what? I bet you actually did change the asset, and your build engineers told you that you couldn't get it in the package.
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay.
It's possible that they never even knew that it needed to be changed. Like
Yeah, that's AAA.
because if they had worked on it, early on, and were like, okay, yeah, we finished these assets, they're done, we move on to something else. If nobody told them, Like somebody has to actively go and tell them like, actually, we need new assets for this because of X, Y, and Z. So you can't throw them under the bus for that
No,
because they
I'm
know
not
maybe
throwing
know.
anyone under the bus.
Yeah.
I'm just sorry for that's why I was like, look, I'm sorry to your team. You guys did an excellent job. I know that I'm like, you know, airing your dirty the dirty AAA laundry. It's all of us though. All of us have done this, you
Well,
know?
and I think okay, but I still think it's a fair criticism because the thing that we really want to talk about is like why that is such a problem in AAA development. Because so the game that I wanted to talk about in reference to this especially is Don't Nod's Tell Me Why from 2020, which I actually recently started playing completely by coincidence. But so as I was playing it, I was like, okay, this feels like a Don't Nod game. It's you know whatever, but the sort of all the background information I found really fascinating, probably more fascinating than the game itself, because the sheer amount of like effort and care and attention that had to be put into a game where like the representation of a transgender individual was pretty decent, like was astounding. And even with all of that, like, so Lauren, you talked about the fact that with Spider-Man Miles Morales, that the sort of the like the cultural sensitivity like reviews, so to speak, came a little too late in the design process, whereas in the case of Tell Me Why, it was there from the very beginning. And even with being there from the very beginning, like, so it's not only that it's a the main character is transgender, Tyler, but also the voice actor is himself transgender, like gave a lot of personal feedback with regards to sort of like voice lines and changing certain things. Like that happened at the very beginning and existed throughout the entire design process, and yet still it was a slog. And so not only is it sort of difficult because AAA games just don't really have the built-in, I guess you could say, production methodologies and sort of like systems for incorporating that sort of thing. It's also that like the industry itself is almost like resistant to it. And and I compare this into my head to the fact that like if you go on to sort of like itch.io right now, you will find a bazillion of the queerest games in existence, some of which are very bad, some of which are really fantastic, and a lot of which are just sort of mediocre. And one of my favorite games, What's Your Gender, is an extremely queer game. Lauren and I have played it on stream. We both love this game. It is amazing, but it is like the antithesis of a AAA game, like the exact opposite. And maybe that's what we like about it, maybe not. But we want to try and figure out like why it is that AAA games and the AAA development space is so resistant to this. So
Yeah.
that's where we're at.
Yeah, and so I am actually going to argue, right, with that resistance in mind. And before I get into that resistance, I do want to say that one, I am obviously in huge favor of support for getting more of diverse not only voices on the screen, but in
Yeah.
those, right, industries that which we make it. Because for me, at the end of the day, AAA really is all about your return on the investment. And a lot of these companies, right, think that going out of their way to hire, right, a non-binary voice actor for a non-binary character, or they need to go hire a culture advisor, those takes a lot of money. But what if, say, in this magical world, that instead of hiring and having to search out of your way for these people, you had already hired them at your studio? So that instead of having to
Yeah.
get and pay extra for a cultural advisor, right? You had someone working on Miles Morales who was already right of
Yeah.
right the Black and the Latinx communities,
And
right
the
now.
expectation is there that you're supposed to be doing that already.
Yeah, and the expectation is there. So I
Yeah.
do also want to I also do want to give some like a nice breath of hope is that the production practices and the AAA industry may not be at your in your consoles or on your PCs right now, right? But I am working right now at a place where the production processes and milestones that we create for ourselves, there is an expectation there for
Yeah.
us not to only be culturally aware but culturally relevant, right? So
Yeah.
that we're not just talking about issues in our games that were the Civil War. Oh, how terrible. But like it's 2021. Why are we still talking about this?
But
To the repercussions that have actually happened after it,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
That's
so
an allusion to a conversation that Lauren and I had before we started recording. So none of you are going to understand that, but it tickles my heart, and I just wanted to let
no, but
everyone know.
it's true. I feel like sometimes people are like, "Man, racism in the South is so bad. Let's move on." Like, no. I mean, I lived it. I lived it, and so it's just it's I lived it on both sides differently. But I will say that I did not live it from a truly colored perspective, and that's my admission. So
Yeah.
now that have gotten that out of the way, because it is very important for you to realize that there is hope, there is a light. There are AAA studios that want to do this right. The want to do it right. There we go. Nice
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
Um, Now let's get into all of the arguments for it. For against being culturally aware, I guess. I don't know. Or
Well, okay.
why AAA so resistant?
Why
Like
is it
maybe you could ask me
okay?
some questions or
So I think there is one logical reason. I mean, all of the reasons are bad in their own way, but there is definitely like a cost benefit analysis reason
no,
for why
well,
not.
there's always reason slash
Yeah.
logic around these arguments, and they are rational, and you can rationalize them. They're
Yeah.
not good or bad. They're just wrong. Okay.
Okay. So, okay, going back to the example of Tell Me Why. One of the problems that Tell Me Why. Okay, so I need to give a little bit of background on the production process. So, like, Don't Nod at its inception was definitely like 100% what you would think of as like an indie studio. They've kind of moved well past that point. And what's interesting about Tell Me Why is that you have a very well regarded at that time indie studio being specifically contracted by Microsoft to create essentially a AAA version of a Don't Nod game. Because that's what Tell Me Why is. It was going to be an Xbox exclusive originally, but then it was released more broadly, and got rave reviews, and it was intended to be a mass market game. But some of the problems that it ran into is that like there are entire markets in other countries where the game cannot be sold at all because of its content. And not tiny markets, but huge video game markets like China, like Russia, where laws regarding, what we might consider to be like non-normative sexualities are incredibly strict. And this is not I mean, it's a little bit of a knock on Russia because it saddens me as a Marxist myself that like Russia has gotten much worse when it comes to like rights for LGBTQ individuals. Like under communism it was actually better. In China's case it's a little bit more complicated. I don't want to get into the politics of that, but the problem is that like if you're going to be a mass market game, you have to sell internationally. And if you like cut yourself off from huge markets, like that's a real problem for a AAA developer.
Yep, and let's go into that just a little bit, especially in the case with China, where one of our being in AAA, selling in places like China or not in China, right? Like you kind of do make mass market titles, right? That's the biggest way to get the return on your investment.
Yeah.
So, looking at China in particular, just as an example, but this is true of any kind of country that you need to license or sell your product in, is that there you always get like a handler. You get this company that works with you, right, to
Yeah.
produce your game in that country. Now,
Yeah.
in China, specifically in that case, especially in the multiplayer market, China requires you to use Chinese servers to host your game. So
Yeah.
all censorship of your content is honestly just in China, which means that Chinese players are getting a different version of your game that is censored.
Yes.
And in some cases, this is not just extended to the LGBTQA community. This is a larger, uh, I don't know, game wide, right?
Yeah.
Issue is that some companies will say that since you are working with us, you now need to filter out any like text words because these are all our competitors.
Yeah.
So if you say that's our competitor. It's kind of like if Google had said, "Hey, if you're working with Google and you want to be on the Google Play Store, you need to now filter out anybody's reference to Apple,"
Yeah.
which would obviously negate the fruit. So what do you do in your game? Do you change every instance of an apple to an orange? Like and that's my joke because that's literally how these filters work.
Yeah.
Is that instead of if you are creating a product as a game developer, that everybody else in the world sees an apple and you don't have enough time or money to change every apple into an orange, you release in China where everybody is calling an apple orange and the Chinese developer or the players, right, know that it has been censored. And
Yeah.
then that now creates a Chinese like player new, like it creates news, right, in China,
Yeah.
where there, and then that creates human rights acts and riots, or like it actually incites this whole thing. So talking about these issues, especially at the mass market level, is huge, because now as a developer you have to choose. Well, it's very easy to remove the apple, right? This is
Yeah.
the Yu-Gi-Oh gun situation for any 90s kids out there that watched Yu-Gi-Oh and they're all pointing their fingers at each other. They're holding
Yeah.
guns, but you can easily take out the gun. You can easily take out the apple. But then when people are just doing this with their hands, which, or they're holding an apple in front of a camera with their hands,
Yeah.
since you guys can't see me, then they're like, "Ah, yes, I love this orange," but there's nothing there. Now
Yeah.
there's a whole, like, Chinese versions of Reddit threads about like what is the metaphorical orange, like, and you get all of these theories and stuff about your product that you can't control, right? You don't
Yeah.
know how the internet's going to react.
Yeah.
So I think that diving into that type of, yeah, so it's hard. That's definitely one reason, is where you want to release with a mass market game. There are billions of players in China, but if you want to make a AAA game with a trans character, good luck.
You're gonna have a rough time. You're gonna have a very rough time.
If a time at all,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it sort of then it leads you back into sort of the problem that you would have had in like literature in the 19th and early 20th century, where you can have like a queer coded character, but
Mhm.
it has to be coded. So you can get away with it, but you have to sort of like slip it underneath the explicit forms of censorship that exist.
Yeah.
And so, but we want to be very clear though that like this is the rational argument for why not to do it.
No, and there's more. I
Yeah.
have more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. But really quickly, I can hear you guys saying, "But Lauren, Tracer is gay and she's in China." Well, let me tell you that the writing team on Overwatch was absolutely fantastic, and not just because I work with one of them. Uh, No, they actually, what they did is, yes, while she is internationally recognized as lesbian and she self-identifies as that, you will notice that in all of the dialogue that they talk about, they always just say Emily. And they never actually, because Emily is her girlfriend,
Yeah.
or yeah, girlfriend. And they see pictures of them and they are just friends in China, because they
Yep.
never, in all of the dialogue, they never say that Emily is her girlfriend. It's just the best, well kept, what the best, least best kept well secret or whatever, like in China,
Yeah.
like they know but they don't know, right? You'll also know that May had a huge, there was a lot of conflict with trying to, as a Chinese hero in Overwatch,
Yeah.
or getting her to actually be playable in China. I'm not sure, I think she is now, but there was a time where they boycotted Overwatch because of one of her potential skins, right? So it is possible, right, with writing, but you're just not, and it's queer coding. You're just not acknowledging that Tracer is
Yeah.
gay. Everyone just kind of knows that she is from,
Yeah.
right, American news. Um,
Yeah, and
but
that's not
then there are
something
probably a lot of players that don't really know that.
you can get away with in a game like Tell Me Why, because like
Hmm.
Tyler's like trans nature is not only explicitly referred to, but it is somewhat fundamental to the nature of so there's this primary relationship between Tyler and his sister Allison, and the way in which, and they have these like shared memories of their childhood, and the way in which they are represented as children, given the fact that Tyler has transitioned, is an issue in the game itself. It's like fundamental to the plot of the game. So you can't, it's not an apple that you can swap out for another piece of fruit. You can't do that in this
Yeah,
game.
you can't do that other than saying that, like, oh, that was my past life.
Yeah, it would
Funny that I
won't
was
make
only a child in my past life,
sense.
2 years ago. But
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
another rational argument that people say is that it's too expensive to hire a culture advisor, right? Or it's too expensive to hire a non-binary actor, or say a trans actor to play this character.
yeah,
Um, Also, right, is that for some reason, executives that have been, I don't want to just say executives because it's not just all executives, but I will say people in general tend to have this argument that it used to come up a lot earlier in my career, which was that, well, how do we know that that actor is the best? right? How do we know that that person is the best fit for the role if we're hiring them because of X, Y, or Z, and X, Y, or Z being a marginalized demographic?
I hate this logic, but I understand where you're going. Go ahead.
No, I also hate this logic. I mean, I'm bringing it up so that people are aware that usually, hopefully, if you listen to this podcast, you have never had that thought.
Yeah.
However, if you had that thought, I am bringing it up now to you to shed light on why that thought is terrible. Um, because imagine like you create this amazing, really empowering, right, black female character, and you hire a really well-known voice actor to play this character, and they're white. Well,
Yeah.
now suddenly anything that, say, like you got any cultural misunderstanding or misrepresentation, right? And there are plenty of black voice actors out there and black women voice actors out there. There's a
There are, yeah.
ton.
Yeah, there are a lot.
Why
They're very good. Many of
why
them are very,
and then they're
very good.
very good. And you know what? They'd probably be cheaper because they're not able to get into these gigs because like all of these, right, are well-known actors are, you know, are they're already booked, right? So why are you not taking it? Right? Why are you
Yeah.
not taking the stab? And the thing is, oh, well, I don't know if they'd be good at it. Like, maybe they're not the best. We should really evaluate on skill, but the skill just happens to all be white.
I should know.
Comforting,
So
right?
earlier I brought up the example of Uncharted, and I should actually note that this was not, in fact, a dig against Laura Bailey, who is the voice actor who played
Oh,
that
yeah,
role.
yeah, yeah. Laura Bailey, you are great. If you were listening to our podcast, which would
One,
be absolutely amazing. We absolutely love your work. It is not a dig on you. It is a dig on the hiring practices and the logic of those
yeah,
that control the
yeah,
industry.
and not just specifically Laura Bailey, but anyone who is put in that position, because when you are a voice actor, like your experience of being involved in game production is you go into a sound booth, you are given sheets of paper with names on it, and you are one of the names and you read their lines. Like, you don't necessarily know how you as a character are going to be represented. You may know or you may not know. And
And
then
even if you do know, it is really you are making money, okay? And you
yeah,
are an actor. And so a lot of times in film and in television, right, especially with the new what Netflix movie that just came out called Passing, there's a lot of like struggle in the communities where it goes, "Oh, but they aren't like maybe they're not black enough."
yeah,
Right? Because they're not as dark skinned as they should be,
yeah,
or as this as they should be. Right? Is the moniker that is used for right anyone who feels that they have been underrepresented, right? And
yeah,
they see representation and they feel like it is not enough. And not a dig on any of the arguments on either side for that movie, but to show you a comparison, right? Is that
yeah,
at the end of the day, Laura Bailey's an actor, and any actor or act put into this position is also there to make money, and they have been told they are the best, right?
yeah.
And so they audition for it, and whether or not they know where they get there, now it's not too late to back out, but in a way it is because they're like, well, I just paid rent this month, and this is my rent check.
Yeah.
You see there's a lot at stake here. So it's not when we talk about these issues, I do want to be make it explicitly clear that we're not talking about individuals contributions to a larger problem. We are talking about the systemic level
Exactly.
of
Yes.
contribution and rationalizations that happen systemically because there's not just I mean,
Because okay, because
Activision
the
Blizzard aside,
yeah.
there's not always just this one individual you can now target and blame, right? There are
But but
systemic,
even at
yeah,
Activision, it wasn't just one individual. It was a culture. Like, so, and that was really the problem, is that, like, yes, you had, the fish rotting from the head, but at the same time what that meant is that it created a culture in which, people who could have, like, gone either way, so to speak, see that a certain form of behavior is acceptable, and so then engage in it because, like, okay, I guess this is just acceptable and this is the way. They're being
exactly.
socialized into that.
Yep, and that's what we call friction, right? Is
Yeah.
how much friction whenever you have these rational arguments that are not necessarily against diversity or including marginalized demographics or voices or cultures within the studio, right? Or even within the games they create. It really is what is the easiest operandi to operate at. And that is what we call frictionless. Because if you see that a behavior is acceptable and the majority of people are, doing that behavior, it is frictionless for you to become a
Yes.
part of that community.
Yep.
It is frictionless to do that. But it is a lot of friction to stand against something. And
Yes.
it's more friction when now your paycheck is on the line.
Exactly. And that's
right?
precisely why in the AAA space you have to be more conscientious about constructing systems in which certain things are normalized, because it is the system that has a far greater determinative power than even the actions of any one given individual. It's like you can talk a lot about, say the behavior of a given CEO or a project manager or a creative director. However, like even they are functionaries of a systemic structure within a company. Sorry.
Right, and it doesn't have to be just within the company, it's actually within the culture as well. So I'm gonna
Yeah.
talk about this in all tech cultures. This is an example I love to use because it should be relatable to just about everybody. And it's the you can never get time with your boss, right? You could never get time with your director. But he always golfs on Saturday, or she could golf, but usually it's a he in this case because
Yes.
that's the relatability. He
Yeah.
always golfs on Saturday. So if you go to the country club and you get to the golf course, you can have unlimited time with your boss. But that means you've got to afford clubs, get into the country club or wherever he's at. You got to look the part, you got to act the part. And so who's the people that fit that demographic now, right? That can look or act the part, that maybe can
Yeah.
afford the golf clubs or just show up and pretend, right? It is usually, right, the people that look exactly like their boss. And it's also, though, now golf is a thing, right? That's the thing. It's the inaccessibility to your boss or your director or the person in charge to make them aware of the issues. And it's
Yeah.
also in a bit now there's another barrier, right? It's the inaccessibility to maybe that location. Because there are a lot of places I know in around the country that if you showed up and you are not of a demographic of someone who looks like they play golf,
Yep.
now you're not even allowed in the door. So good luck to
Or
trying to
you're
get a
or you're going to be
promotion,
harassed, or you might get
or
the
you're going to be
cops called
harassed.
on you. Yeah.
Cops are gonna get called on you. I
Yeah.
mean, I know a story of one of our executive producers. He's like driving to Los Gatos for his job, where he works, and like he gets pulled over by a motorcycle cop because they're like, "Oh, see you. You see you're from Oakland. You still living in Oakland?" And it's like, "Yes. Oh, okay. What are you doing in Los Gatos?" Which, for those of you who don't know, it's I mean, the Bay Area is big, but
There's
that's
the
just a
place.
highway right
Wait.
down.
Wait,
That's
I want to
like
ask a question. There's a place in the Bay Area called the Cats.
yeah. It's called the Cats.
Okay. Okay. Setting that aside, please continue.
Yeah. Anyway, it's just like saying, hey, I need to drive 40 minutes to go to like visit my sister's place, and you get pulled over, and someone goes, "Oh, I see you're from this city and you're of a certain demographic.
Yeah.
What are you doing here in this nice area to make trouble?"
Yeah.
Like, because Los Gatos is very nice, by the way, and it is predominantly not
Yeah.
of
Cats are
these
really nice. You're
individuals.
right. Cats
Cats
are
are
very
really nice. You should always get a cat.
nice.
So I'm just saying that that's going to work. Okay.
Yeah.
That's just showing up for the job you were hired to do, much less anything beyond that.
I'm glad that you brought this point up, the sort of like the issue of sort of like the broader not just cultural, but also like socioeconomic context in which these things occur. Because so the voice actor that they got to play Tyler in Tell Me Why is named August Aiden Black. And again, because I'm a nerd when it comes to looking at background information, like I followed them on Twitter, started like low key stalking them, and came to discover that like actually they personally are having an incredibly rough time, like in terms of their finances, in terms of like their social situation, like their life is incredibly difficult. And so the thing is, and this is not just true of like any across the board, like transgender individuals, even in American society where it's quote unquote more acceptable, like it is extremely difficult. You can be alienated from your family. You can have a much harder time getting particular kinds of jobs. Like you just rampant discrimination. And so, like, your basic socioeconomic circumstances are going to be far worse than, say, like your average, say, like white voice actor who just, shows up and is like, hey, I'm really great. I have a great voice and I have great talent. Like, this other individual, like Augustine Tyler, also is really talented, but they have to then like there are several rungs on the ladder that they have to climb before they can even get to where other people start. And that is really sort of the issue, and that like there is so much money in the AAA space that could be used to make sure that a wider variety of people are all starting at that same rung on the ladder, but there is a kind of like rank indifference to it because they only see them show up at the point where they're like, several where they're at the very top of the ladder. Like everyone's at the top of the ladder and they're like, oh, well, everyone's at the top of the ladder, so they must have gotten here exactly the same way. And that's just not the case.
It's just not the case.
Yeah. And I think that is where we are going to end this episode. Follow us on Twitter at Futidashipod. We have our website, futidashipod.com. And honestly, this is one of those instances where, because we are two cisgender individuals, because we are both, Lauren is white passing and I'm definitely very white, we want to hear from you all about your experiences in dealing with these issues, precisely because the whole point of this is that if you are in a position of authority or power or like historical advantage, the responsibility is on you to pay more attention. And so if you are in a similar situation to Lauren and me, like, do your fucking research. You look into these things and be more careful and be more attentive, because as Lauren said, things are changing, but like it's still not enough and we need to do better. And so we will see you all again in a couple of weeks.